Welcome, folks. We'll get started in about 12:35 of my time to give folks some time to get on and grab their lunch, go from one meeting to the next, that sort of thing. I imagine we'll have a small crowd today as people are taking off for an extra long weekend. That's okay. The topic for today is A/B testing, and it won't be the only meeting we have about this. So we'll collect what we can today and probably have a part 2 at some point in the future. So one more minute and we'll get started. Okay, let's talk A/B testing. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're able to join right before a holiday weekend. Um, I I think you heard me earlier. I don't think anyone new has joined since I said that this will be the first of probably a few meetings around A/B testing. It's going to, since it's a feature that we don't have the ability to do at the moment, I can imagine there's a lot of requirements we can collect. I know it's going to take more than one meeting to get through them. So let's get started. So what we're talking about when we talk about A/B testing, at least from my perspective, what we're talking about is the ability to perform research using the platform and research on courses, research on uh, a bunch of different things. That's kind of what I want to talk about first. Is I want to start from the beginning and really think about what aspects of courses that we think we want to be able to test and research, what mechanisms need to be in place to perform that sort of testing. And I threw a couple ideas out there just to help brainstorm. And, are there different interface needs for researchers who want to perform this type of A/B testing versus instructors who just want to kind of do it maybe in a more lightweight fashion. So I'd like to discuss that a little bit. And what tools exist now that folks might use that we might want to integrate with? And really just how are these things done now? How is research performed now? And I can imagine in the next set of meetings that I have about this to invite some of our research community directly. We have communities that talk about like AI and machine learning, and it would be interesting to get their perspective on this sort of thing too, and the kind of tools they use. But does anyone have want to get us started in any way, shape, or form? Who wants to kick off the discussion? And Greg, I thought you wouldn't be able to make it today. I'm glad you could join. So the format of these meetings is to collect requirements and ideas from the community. So
I guess I'll kick in.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, I think that there's kind of the IRB issues, and to what extent can you do experiments without, making it easier to get IRB. For instance, one style that seems to be easier to get through IRB is on this topic. Like I'm testing out, A is some new thing and B is current. And I have it for two different sections of the course. So some students will see the new stuff on topic 1, and other students will see the new stuff on topic 2. And so that means they both are exposed. It's fair in the sense that every student gets this new thing once in the course, although it's on different topics. So that, I don't know, what are we allowed to do A/B wise? Because it sounds great. I make something new and I'm going to test it. Half the students will get it. But what's the ethical way to do that? I don't really know that I know.
Yeah. I can say that I've been part of this learning engineering group, Google group, and they got into a pretty lengthy discussion back and forth in email about the ethical considerations of A/B testing. And some places don't even touch it, like won't even consider it because there's so many implications for it. But what could the platform do to help with that? Like, are there templates that we would need to incorporate?
I do think bringing in someone who's an expert in this or a lot of experience in it, because that's the one I could think of that you would be able to just immediately say, I'm putting this new thing in on 2 different topics and do that kind of thing. Half the students will do A in the first topic and the other half will see A in the second topic. So that would be one of that kind of, I suspect a lot of IRB considerations will come down to that, remembering what condition a student was in last time and using that to make the decision on the future condition.
Yeah.
And
Hi,
Gideon here. Hi. The IRB wouldn't have to be each individual institution, right? You could get it done once at Carnegie, and then it would be okay for anybody who adopts the course, or would it need to be reviewed each institution that decides they want to run experiments?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure of the answer, but it sounds like if we bake in the ability to do this sort of testing, we also have to bake in the ability to provide really detailed information about the previous studies or the study that's going on, and be able to track those conditions through no matter what, so that we could then present that information kind of back to anyone else who wants to use the course. Is that kind of what you're thinking too?
Kind of. It's more if you find out that only Carnegie Mellon has to run it through IRB, and you find that Carnegie Mellon's, review board is going to be amenable to this, I'd call it automatically paired AB or something. Like you're only allowed to improve two things and give one improvement to each half. If they're willing to say yes to all that in all conditions. And it makes sense that that approval be allowed everywhere and anywhere because it comes from Carnegie Mellon, right? Then you only have to do IRB once at Carnegie Mellon. And then all you need to advertise is, look, if you want to run experiments, this is the only kind that is pre-approved for this course. You'll have to create 2 interventions so that, right, in different places, and right, and describe what'll happen, and then say, and you can run your data analysis on that, blah, 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 right? Because you're no longer running national copies, right? Everybody gets their own local copy now. Yeah.
Well,
So
good. We have both, but I think that's what you're bringing up, which is interesting, is being able to encourage others to perform the same sort of research, which only expands the, the data set and the conditions under which the
exactly. So as much as you can pre-approve this, whatever we want to call it, paired AB or something, fair AB, right? As much as you can pre-bake in the approval via Carnegie Mellon, the easier it is, because if I've got to go to my IRB every time I want to try to improve the course, then I'm just, right? I'm not gonna, because I'm gonna be doing it all the time, because that's the whole point of having a local copy, isn't it?
Right.
Either that, or I'm just gonna not run an experiment, or I'm gonna pretend that, the data's anonymous and it's part of my regular classroom behavior, so, and it's not optional, so it doesn't matter, right? So then you're getting a little around the edges of you're cutting a little bit into ethics out of ease.
Right. What's cool about this is what I'm imagining is its own like interface even within Torus, to have this whole like, experimentation, I don't know what we call it, A/B testing panel almost, that kind of helps walk folks through what they can or can't do with the existing setup or existing set of experiments. It would be really interesting to have a place where people could go to see what experiments are running right at the moment, and people could kind of make their experimentation I don't know what to call it, protocols, like kind of public or not, and could invite others. That's some interesting stuff, Gideon. Thanks.
Yeah. And then the nice thing is, if you've got that kernel of what Carnegie Mellon can pass along to anybody else, it also makes clear what the boundaries are. And if you wish to go beyond the boundary of this, that's already baked in, right? 2 improvements, half get each, right? If you want to go beyond this, well, the system's not going to let you do it. You have to go to your own IRB and, do it your own way. So it makes sure that nobody takes this product and uses it in a way that the Carnegie Mellon IRB board thinks is unethical.
Right.
But it allows them to go locally and convince their local board, can I do this more thing, right? It forces ethicality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So if you think about what kinds of things you might want to test out, what, so there's these, we're talking kind of in general right now, like these two interventions, you know, A and B. But would you imagine, would you want that ability to be very granular with it, like in terms of even like text on a page? I can imagine we probably want the ability to do, you know, text, activities, assessment questions, videos versus other things, videos versus videos. So I guess just about any element in a course would be fair game for A/B testing. Does that sound about right? Is it a dumb question? Is there anything beyond that that I mentioned that I am not thinking of at the moment that you guys would like to be able to, you know, to test out? So aside from IRB considerations, are there, what are things that you wish were baked into the system now that would allow you to do more, not just experimentation, but gather more information about the context in which the course is being used, say? Yeah, Dave?
But so sometimes when you do conditions, you want to have striding, I forget what the word for this is, but you want to make sure that you get the right distribution of demographics and also performance levels.
Mhm.
So things like using the learning dashboard to estimate the student where they're at, and then making sure that the conditions are balanced by those various criteria. And that's something that's hard. It just adds a whole burden when you're trying to do, you know, random assignment, but making sure that it's done on, you know, that the two populations are as similar as you can get them.
Right. So does that mean that we would have to bake in the ability to collect various demographic data?
Yeah, I guess some, yeah, so if we have demographic data, but yeah, and that's,
Or
or I guess
or
there's two
maybe,
parts, like what are you allowed to get? So there might be some criteria that you would be able, that's a whole different thing, but they also the data on the learning. So I guess there's two sources of information. One is some survey you gave them. You're going to want to do distributions across that to make sure it's distribution you want. And then some data that's coming from the system. So when we've done it before, we do things like take the performance on the first exam and dividing into low, medium, and high performance. And then you choose, then you do random assignment within those three buckets. That's the kind of thing I'm sort of thinking about.
yeah, that's great. So that what that requires then is some initial set of criteria you collect. And then I'm thinking of workflow here, you know, and then the ability to use that information to then do assignment of either condition. I didn't even
If,
think about that.
yeah, if you're using exactly the same number of subjects from each of the strata that you define, it's called stratified sampling. If you want to look up the language in the standard, you know, for research board purposes. If you're doing something else like population proportional, like you're going to pick 1/10 of the ones in the top third and 1/10 of the ones in the middle third, it's not called stratified sampling, but it's the same idea. You're doing some kind of criteria splitting, and then in your randomization, you're not doing simple random sampling, right?
Mhm.
It's I think they recommend this more careful sampling when you expect that the different groups will have very different responses, results, or opinions. If you don't have that prior expectation, simple random sampling is better. But when you do expect a difference, it's better to make sure you've got that breadth guaranteed by population proportional or stratified. That's what the basic textbooks say, at least.
Right, but what you're bringing up is this ability, what you and David both brought up, is this ability to do different kinds of sampling and have an interface. We would need an interface to be able to kind of sort out the students and assign them to those different conditions. So,
Right. And I think you'll have to work out the particulars with your our IRB board to talk about what they'll allow to go out nationally under their approval.
mhm,
Because when you start talking about surveys you write for the students and then dragging that into ways to slice apart your groups, then you might get into student confidentiality. That their anonymity has to be highly protected, even from us, the instructors,
mhm,
when you're running experiments in your own classroom. Because I did an education doctorate, so I've dealt with this stuff. If there's
mhm,
any sense that the student even falsely feels obligated to participate because you're their instructor, the IRB is going to come down hard.
mhm,
So it's often easier to make things mandatory, and like your AB balanced design, okay, it's mandatory, right? They don't have a choice. They kind of don't even know which they get the, right? That's not a big deal. But then slicing by surveys that you've written, right? Could somebody abuse that, or could students feel uncomfortable about that, right?
mhm,
Maybe not if it's their own if it's just their performance within the system showing high, low, medium on the first test. That's fine, and you can keep their anonymity protected, and however the data is analyzed or whatever, right? So you got to watch out, and I think it really is something that's got to be your IRB board, and how far out they're going to stick their necks to say yes for everybody using it.
yeah, interesting. So the interface for the experiments needs to be, you know, completely different than what the instructors see. If it's instructors that are doing these experiments, they have to kind of have this almost separation from the experiment. They have to set it up and let it run and kind of not meddle with it or review it until the very end, so that they can't make connections between.
Right. I would expect that's what your IRB and any IRB would require, but I did a very different kind of qualitative research on a very small number of students who were my own in a very small class. So it was a different scenario. I'm just sort of anticipating the
Mhm,
possibilities.
right.
But right, and it will be asking your IRB to approve for everyone, so I expect they'll be conservative. But it certainly seems quite possible with the technological tools that you have in mind to do this ethically in a way that feels protective of the students, right? That's the IRB's job, to be protective of the students, sometimes to the disadvantage of researchers.
Right. So it's almost like I would have to start in terms of gathering requirements for these type of interfaces and workflows. I would probably have to start with some IRB guidance to ensure that we're setting things up in a way that they would be able to perform investigations easily, or the fact that we'd have to be proving that the whole system is kind of set up in a way to do no harm to the students, right?
You got it.
In the past, with a bunch of these, CMU has acted as the honest broker, but it's still up to your IRB to actually approve the study.
Mhm.
At least I think as far as like the data analysis tools. So mostly this is a tool that we do with educational research and education teaching as our lenses on it. But I'm not sure we are always in the loop for the IRB, other than if you do, a lot of institutions do accept our IRB approval if we are doing the approval,
Mhm.
but it's still up to you to get your institution's IRB approval to even use our tools.
It's a little, there's a a fairly broad IRB right now that covers collection of data and sharing the fully blinded data with Data Shop. And so it is true that there are sites that are participating in research through OLI that that institution's IRB did not have to approve it. And that, so I do think that's one part of the discussion, is how far can we go with that kind of broad IRB that covers everything? That does not support A/B testing as far as I know.
No,
And
right.
so what would be ethical to ask for that kind of coverage for? So
Right.
interesting thing. But I do think it's also correct to just say there's a whole bunch of functionality that we should support. And that means when people decide to do that kind of experiment, they'll get the IRB for it. And then we just want to have the technical ability to do it. And I think that's where these sort of striated sampling, I don't know what else that sort of, you were saying, like, what's the grain size of this? Right now,
Mhm.
if you wanted to do A/B testing, is it only at the module level that you can sort of make 2 modules and then create a course syllabus that has one versus the other?
I mean, you could probably do it at the page level even. It can be done at any level. I really want to pick the brains. You guys talking make me think I also need to reach out to our partners at UNH, because they developed that student cognition toolkit, and they do experiments all the time. And I know they do it through their institution uses our IRB, I believe, or is like,
Right.
so I don't know of any other places that do regular experimentation. I think they even do kind of some A/B type testing.
And the other, how, is there a reason to merge this with the discussion of adaptive learning? Because adaptive learning is going to be making a decision on what to show the student based on a bunch of stuff. And this is just one more stuff, right? What condition are they in? And so from a technical perspective, is it different than the technology you need for adaptive?
Well, it's kind of, because just it depends on what kind of adaptive, right? You can have a whole bunch of different types of adaptive, and I can imagine, like, for example, when I was at Acrobatic, they developed the ability to do adaptive based on they would deliver scaffolded versus unscaffolded questions in an assessment based on the learner's learning estimate for that learning objective at the time that they enter the survey or the assessment. I'm sorry. That's very different. Like, so in that case, it was all built, the adaptivity was all built around that learner, that learning estimate for that objective. That's a very different system than if you're basing it on other variables, right? So you would have to have the ability to say, okay, you can experiment in this system on these things that also promote adaptivity. So then either way, those things could be used for either adaptivity or experimentation, but then how is adaptivity then not experimentation, right? Because we really don't know if that approach is helping the learner or not in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of my problem with adaptivity to begin with. It sounds like a good idea to have, like, personalized learning paths, but what's going on here? I must have gotten kicked out of my account. And yeah, so there's lots of different ways to that brings up grain size, that brings up the mechanisms which that can control other mechanisms for experimentation. Interesting. I didn't think about adaptivity being that way until till now. Dave, you really hit the nail on the head with my my little problem with adaptivity. Is that we don't know that it works. And it can be done in so many different ways, right? But a good point though, if we have those mechanisms already built in, then they will be used for experimentation. I'll have to see what we're doing because I know we're building this whole adaptive engine that kind of bolts on to Torus at the moment. It's not baked in. It's like a custom activity shim, I think is how I've heard it referred to. And that's interesting because it will be used for experimentation then, and it'll have to connect up to whatever interfaces we have for A/B testing.
Yeah, it does also sound like you're going to need some way of either guiding the adaptation for experimental parameters or ignoring them. So, yeah, if you're going to be using it as a general factor in the course, and you're also trying to use it as an experimental factor, you're going to want to direct it for some people, direct it another way for other people. So we're not talking about a simple adaptation. We're talking multiple adaptation paths.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's what this kind of custom mechanism will allow, I imagine, different customization paths, because I know what they're basing it on is Smart Sparrow's ability to design pathways based on different variables. And it's I know for me, another reason why I'm not a fan of adaptation and adaptivity in these types of systems is because, that's a lot of design assumptions you're making when you're doing that, when you're building those little mini pathways for each, if branching questions is one thing, but then opening and closing different doorways based on those is another. And that's kind of how it goes. You can really get granular. Huh.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of adaptations used for language placement tests.
Mhm.
And I know the sort of standard one that we've been using took 10 years of iterative trials before they got to a place where they were fairly comfortable with its results.
Wow. Yeah, that would take so much testing out, right? In all different scenarios and situations, let alone with different types of learners. Okay, then that's an interesting thing I didn't think about before, Dave. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's an interesting question. Established forms of adaptive testing. I believe there's a nursing exam that's the same. It's an adaptive test.
Well, they say that I think it's been so long, but I think isn't the GRE built a little bit like that too when it went online?
Yeah, the GRE is adaptive, but it's a difference between adaptive testing and adaptive teaching.
Yeah.
There's big difference.
There is. And that's, yeah, when you talk about adaptive teaching, it is it opens up a larger can of worms, I suppose.
Though it
So,
does sound,
well, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, it does sound like, as I've been percolating in my brain, a concrete thing here is if we're setting up A/B testing, probably going to have an anonymized version that people can review and assign to the various conditions. But I can also see it for just normal classroom use. You'd want to be able to access the personal information outside of experiments.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, if we have it baked into the system, I guess it will be used.
Yeah, because I can see it people signing up for different sections, like they have an honor section, so they just throw the honor people into the honor section so they get a little bonus material without having to completely redesign and set up 2 courses.
Oh, interesting. Oh, it's funny, you know, we're talking about a system that doesn't exist, and then we're already thinking about ways that will also be used outside of those parameters that it's built for. But you're right. You know, if it's there, if we were able to collect that information on students, but that's information that, depending on what's being collected, do instructors have access to that kind of information now on their students?
Well, that's something you might want to think about setting up, is if it's running an experiment, saying, okay, what data on the students can be reviewed during the testing period.
Mhm.
So if it is an experiment and say, oh, we can't ever use the students' names never show up, but they need to know the section information or some, you know, just a checklist of what information is collected and what would be available in the interface on the review of the distribution.
Yes, nice, nice, yeah.
So again, a lot of these is you're setting before a priori what information is going to be available, but it's up to the designer to actually set those parameters in accordance to whatever their IRB allows.
Great, great consideration. Yeah. I love how we just stick a pin on the ethical stuff, and I'm glad we were able to do that, to just think about how would we want to see this play out. Were you going to say something more, Dave, about that?
I was going to say, we have a project with Naboru where we're doing adaptive learning, and the conditions will be different styles of adaptive learning. So we're thinking of it as reinforcement learning and a policy. So policy on deciding what's the best thing to show the student next. And so the conditions would be different algorithms for making that choice. So
Okay.
that's a weird one, I think.
It is.
I
That's a complex.
I don't think you need to automate support for, actually, but if you were
Well,
saying you're concerned that the problem with adaptive learning is how do you assess it, then the condition does become different styles of adaptation.
Mhm.
The thing about the honors class actually brings up an interesting thing, which is basically having a very similar functionality, basically, that doesn't actually get into testing anything, which is just if somebody wants to like run one course but have variations in it for some reason, which is like somewhat different from running 2 courses. Like I know when I was in undergrad, I was in some courses where some of the students were undergrad students and some of them were grad students, and the grad students were like had like extra assignments. And so if somebody wants to do that kind of thing, then that's basically a use case for vary the course feature that doesn't like, even if they're not testing anything, which is kind of interesting.
Right. So how much of the experimentation mechanisms can be exposed to just not do experimentation, but do other things with it? That's, yeah, because it will be used that way if we have the mechanism to do that kind of thing. So right now, like Dave, in that example that you just gave, you're giving you're assigning students to really 3 different courses, because you can't do all of those different types of activity in one that I'm aware of, right?
Yeah, we probably have to do it between each section. We would create different different sections. And actually, we're just waiting for Torus to come online, because how we do to really do this correctly, we need support that's outside of the current OLI system. Although we're working with John Stanford to try and get something he has we'll be able to put a little thing, I hope, on a page that is doing X adaptation with some algorithms. And it will know what happened on previous pages because it will actually be the same learning object that's appearing on all these pages. So we're kind of just embedding some adaptive tool into the course, and no matter what page it's on in the course, it's going to be showing stuff. But that's such a kludge, that's such a non-elegant solution. So we're ultimately wanting to use the whatever gets built in for adaptivity in Torus to do this project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right around the corner from being ready too.
Norm says, don't count on using it in classrooms till fall, next fall. So
Okay, yeah, well, the design for that is what takes so much energy and thought, right? In my experience anyway.
yeah.
So even if it was online today, it probably would still be a little while before you get it up and running. Next fall actually is not bad timing.
Yeah.
Or the tool development and the design then piece that you'll need to do in the meantime. But that's interesting. What you've mentioned here is this kind of integration with a tool that already exists, right? That is used for, what's it used for now? The John Stamper tool.
I think it was being used for some adaptive studies, but it has, we have to revive it because I don't think it's been used in a little while. So shaking the dust off of it and make sure it still works.
Yeah,
this semester. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I'll have to find out what that is. It's hard to keep up on all the different tools that are developed at CMU for various things like that, but it's cool to find out about them. Okay, so we've talked about assigning students to different conditions. We've talked about the ability to track certain information and actually make that information available or not to different populations, meaning instructors or administrators. So I can imagine, a page that, there's different views into the system for the same material and the same set of students that would be needed for experimentation versus not. And being able to kind of toggle those on and off depending on IRB protocols. You want to be able to, I imagine, embed different types of surveys and data collection and tie that to different things. Or is a lot of that, or is that more analysis? And we kind of have analysis tools in our ecosystem with Data Shop and LearnSphere, but what else don't you have that you wish you had that could be really built into any of those systems, whether it be OLI or, because OLI now, Torus is going to integrate much more cleanly and smoothly with those other systems. It's in the works already, to be able to communicate back and forth with Data Shop. Can you think of any other, any wish list items around those integrations or tools, like I said, that don't exist in any of those that you need?
The one thing I've kind of always wished for is an easy way of basically monitoring engagement, which in normal A/B testing would be through attrition. And just, seeing if they're hitting the pages, if they're doing any time, because what we've done with OLI a lot is, put these activities as a substitute for this engagement. But if you have a lot of text material or videos or other things, those are not always necessarily in that measure. And seeing if they actually, the simple question, did they actually finish reading all the material, or at least going through all the material in the course, or at least being exposed to it?
Right. I think the tricks, that's a great thing to bring up, because I think the tricks to that are you know, what can you know about a student when they hit a page, right? You know, they hit the page. How do you know if they read it unless you provide some activities that kind of assess or provide practice against that material? So those are a more reliable source of information about engagement, we believe, than page views or, you know, any kind of passive learning that you really can't measure.
Right. I'm only saying this because in terms of A/B testing in industry, what they usually measure is how long you're on the page.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So regardless of our say in the matter, we want to be able to provide different ways of measuring those things, and even maybe bolting on additional tools, being able to integrate with other tools. Like I think Eberly created a tool called DocuScope that I think it's DocuScope that tracks eye movement on a page, and they're testing that out with certain courses.
DocuScope is for completely different.
Oh,
It's
is it?
for DocuScope is for analyzing student texts, not eye tracking.
Oh, I'm thinking of something else then. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm getting that mixed up. There is an eye tracking tool. I don't know what it's called at the moment.
Yeah.
But thanks for correcting me on that. But we do have something like that. We're not using it readily because there's so much testing that needs to be done on that. But yeah, being able to provide, even if we think activities are the best way to measure engagement, we still have to provide different ways of being able to measure that, and maybe even new ways that we haven't even thought of yet. So good point. That engagement information is probably one of the most requested pieces of data from our system that I hear a lot of.
Do want to bring up, kind of on the opposite side, the surveillance level of that, which is pretty intense, especially if you're getting any information other than that they looked at it, like when they looked at it. That is pretty intense surveillance, and that accessibility concerns around people who access things differently, like if somebody needs to copy it into another application to adjust the text somehow, or if they need to print it, or if they need to download it for online access, and how that'll affect the system.
Yeah, I wonder how much guidance we have to provide when we provide those tools to say, what you're actually measuring is this, and they're actually proxies for engagement. And if we have some sort of responsibility to make people aware of that at all, if we're going to allow it.
Yes, and also if we have that functionality, if somebody will try to use it for grading, and then that will become an accessibility problem or something like that.
Right. It's so I've never had to think so deeply about how tools and functionality can be used for bad. How much responsibility do we have around that if we provide the tools? It's like we have to provide them with some disclaimers or something.
Yeah, and also I think somebody mentioned this somewhere else where I was, that these things can take kind of systemic overhead. That can be a problem if people have less good computer systems, because it makes it harder for things to load if there's more processes running.
Interesting. Probably all the reasons we haven't built this in yet. Thanks, Sasha. Interesting stuff. Yeah, how much responsibility we have when folks are using these things in other ways. But yeah, thanks, Michael, though, for bringing up the engagement thing. It's almost always a measure that's attempting to be measured, even if that's not the experiment, right? Is how do we know when students are actually in an online system, actually reading, actually watching, actually doing what's running, or if it's just running in the background as they're, watching TV or something else.
Well, this comes with one of these summer courses I participated in. We had a short course probably only took about 2-3 hours to get through. But we were wondering at the start of the first session, how far people had gotten through it.
Mhm.
And that was the simple question is we couldn't answer that question at that point. We could only say, well, they got through this activity. But we also, when we polled the people, there's like, oh yeah, we read all the way through, but we just stopped doing the activities.
Interesting.
Well, the activities got more complex, and with their time scale, they just stopped doing the more complicated ones.
Right. They prioritize the reading and getting all the information over practicing with it.
Yeah. Because that we would like that information for determining where to start the lectures.
Yes, right. In fact, this just came up. I have a to-do item in my long list that I might actually, because I get asked this question all the time. I get asked, how many hours does it take a student to get through this material? You know, we build these semester-long courses that vary in number of learning objectives from, you know, I've seen semester-long courses be anywhere from 40 to 80, you know, just trying to quantify how big a course is and how long it takes any given student to work through it. It's funny, nobody asked that of a textbook, but I always get asked about it in terms of our online courses. And I'm to the point where I might just have a cohort of student workers just take courses so that I can get timing estimates and be able to provide more clear information about, you know, how much material is in here. Because if you look at any given, if you look at statistics versus psychology versus chemistry, the amount of material is very different. The denseness of it, you know, too. And the number of activities, I'm sure that makes a huge difference too. So that instructors could have more information to guide students and actually assign realistic, you know, expectations. But yeah, so that's another reason I would want to know kind of timing, just to know.
Yeah, it might be useful to have those kind of measures more in an aggregate form
Mm-hmm.
for the course, as opposed to, you know, so you can't tie it to a particular student
Exactly.
to get rid around some of this ethical considerations. But yeah,
But
some
in terms
aggregate
of,
measures.
yeah, but this leads into, you know, this idea of maybe at some point a marketplace of different, you can imagine a marketplace of different online courses around the same topic that have different characteristics, right? One could be, you know, amount of time it takes to get through it. One could be reading level. One could be performance data in the aggregate. You know, this course performs, you know, students of this type who go through this course have more success. It would be nice to have all of that kind of information around any given course. Be able to contrast and compare and say, okay, I have this particular student population, so it looks like this course might work better for me than this one because of these reasons.
Doing something like this by aggregate, I agree, does have, I think, like a lot of those advantages, and also kind of parallels how we do formative assessments, right? That they're also aggregate, and thereby potentially makes it less likely that people will game the system, because I know when you know, when I think somebody was just mentioning that, you know, people said they read things. I mean, I'm sure everyone also has the experience where people say they read something and they didn't. And it's just that they know that it's expected that you say that you do. And so similarly, if people know it's going to be checked, they're more likely to make it look like they did, even if they didn't.
Oh yeah. One of the best lessons I ever learned in life is you get what you measure, right? Like whatever you measure, if you're measuring productivity, well, by golly, people's productivity will look like it's getting better, but at the expense of what? Probably quality. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, right now, like you said, Sasha, this is a complaint we have in our system often, where we only provide the formative activities in the learning dashboard. We only do that in the aggregate. You can drill down into individual student performance, but we don't make it easy. And one of the reasons for that is to provide what Norm has described as a safe space for practice, right? Like, because if we start allowing grading based on that, or on formative practice, students just, they'll either game the system or they won't use it the way we want them to use it.
I need to take off, but thanks everybody. Have a
Yeah,
good
I
Labor Day.
actually,
Yeah.
thanks, Dave. Thanks for your participation. Really appreciate it. You guys have all given me good stuff to think about. I'm actually probably going to wrap up in about 5 minutes. And so you've given me, like I said, lots of things to think about in terms of even just setting up experiments, setting up A/B testing, IRB considerations, and the types of data. Even in there's a lot on the types of data that you all are looking to collect or know about any given set of courses or course. This is really going to help me figure out, at least start to set up some workflows for experimentation for A/B testing, and know where to dig in. Like I said before, I think I'm going to have to go and maybe start with our IRB office to say, okay, if we're going to do these things, how involved do they need to be? What are things that we haven't thought of that should be considered? Probably starting there is a good place, because they'll probably give me more to think about than anyone else. And again, this won't be the last of discussions about A/B testing. I will say in the next Torus community meeting, which is not August 6th. It is actually, I didn't change this. It's October 1st. And this is going to be a quick demo of what exists in Torus at the moment. And I would love to hear if anybody's used any of Torus yet, what their feedback and experiences have been. But if you haven't, then I would really want to just see your reactions to the interfaces as they are now and the functionality that exists so far. And then I can give a deep dive into the roadmap to say what's coming next and what we're working on next. So yeah, please join us in that meeting. You can always go to the Torus community page and submit ideas for even future meeting topics. You can always reach out to me directly too. So I want to just thank you all for joining today and participating and giving me a lot to think about. And I hope you all have a really lovely long weekend.
Yeah, you too, Aaron.
Thanks, Mark. Please come again, and we'll see you next month.